Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. We've been looking at the impact of information networks on human history, and today we're going to take a fascinating look at this through the work of historian Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah, his analysis covers a huge span of time, from the Stone Age to the future of AI. And he asks some really big questions like, are humans ultimately wise or are we just kind of self-destructive?
Yeah, and why, despite all our advancements, are we facing things like ecological collapse and so much misinformation?
Exactly.
So today we're diving into Harari's book, Nexus. So buckle up for a thought-provoking exploration of information, truth, and power.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things about Harari's work is how he challenges our assumptions about what information is really for. He suggests that its main purpose isn't necessarily to accurately represent reality,
Okay.
but more to create connections between people.
Really? That's a surprising take. I mean, it seems kind of counterintuitive to think that truth wouldn't be the most important thing about how information works.
Yeah, exactly. Think about the power of narratives like religions or national myths. They might not be factually accurate, right?
Right.
But they've united huge populations for centuries.
How?
They create a shared identity and a sense of belonging.
I see.
And this actually helps explain why even false information can be so powerful. If it connects with people emotionally and reinforces their beliefs, it can spread rapidly, even if it's not true.
So it's more about the social impact of information, not just whether it's objectively true.
Exactly. And Harari uses a bunch of historical examples to illustrate this point.
Oh, like what?
He looks at the Bible and how it created the shared narrative that helped unify all these diverse groups of people.
Interesting.
But he also digs into some darker periods, like the witch hunts in Europe and the rise of totalitarian regimes like Stalinism and Nazism.
It is kind of crazy how all these different movements were able to use information networks to spread their ideologies and gain power.
It really shows how manipulation of information is not a new thing. It's been a theme throughout history. And now, with the rise of the internet and social media, Harari is worried about the potential dangers of AI manipulating information on a massive scale.
That almost sounds like, a science fiction scenario where algorithms control the narrative and shape how we see the world.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from those possibilities at all.
Ah,
He argues that AI, with its ability to process tons of data and learn so quickly, could become the ultimate network of delusion.
delusion. What do you mean?
Imagine AI creating personalized realities for each of us,
Okay.
tailoring information to our specific preferences and biases. So basically, we would be trapped in echo chambers of misinformation.
Wow. That's a disturbing thought. So I feel like we're already seeing some of this happening with personalized news feeds and recommendation algorithms online.
Exactly. And as AI gets more sophisticated, it could completely blur the lines between reality and fabrication, creating experiences that feel real but are totally made up.
Harari even uses that example of the Rohingya genocide, the one that was fueled by all that misinformation on Facebook.
Right. He sees that as a really clear warning sign of how technology, if it's not controlled, can be used to incite violence and division. It highlights how urgent it is that we develop ethical guidelines for how we develop and use AI. We have to make sure that it's used to benefit humanity and not to control or manipulate us.
So I guess the question is, are we just doomed to be puppets in this AI-driven information world?
I don't think so. Harari really emphasizes that understanding how these information networks work is crucial. If we can develop critical thinking skills and learn how to evaluate information for ourselves, that's our best defense against being manipulated.
It sounds like a call to action,
Yeah.
we all need to be more informed and more careful about the information we consume.
I think you're right, and that's where Harari's historical perspective is so valuable. By understanding how past societies have been shaped by information, we can learn to navigate our own information landscape more effectively.
Yeah, it really is. It's about recognizing that we aren't just passively absorbing information, we're active participants in shaping this whole information landscape.
Mm,
And Harari uses a really interesting concept to help us understand this dynamic. It's called the nexus.
the nexus. I'm not sure I've heard that term before. What does he mean by that?
It's the idea of information acting as like a glue. It creates connections and shared realities that go beyond just the facts themselves.
Yeah.
Think of it as a web of all these narratives and beliefs and values that can unite people on a huge scale.
So it's not just transmitting data, it's more like weaving these bigger stories that shape how we see the world.
Exactly. And these nexuses can be incredibly powerful.
In what way?
Well, they can influence everything from social structures to political ideologies.
Wow.
Like Harari uses the example of early human societies and how they use stories and myths to create a sense of shared identity and purpose. That makes sense. I mean, before written language, oral traditions and storytelling would have been the main way to pass on knowledge and values.
Exactly. And these stories, which were often filled with supernatural elements, helped explain the world, reinforced social norms, and made people feel like they belonged to a group.
So they acted as a kind of social glue, holding communities together so they could cooperate and thrive.
Exactly. And Harari argues that this ability to cooperate, which was fueled by this shared storytelling and creation of these powerful nexuses, actually gave humans a big evolutionary advantage.
That's interesting.
But just like any powerful tool, this ability to create these nexuses can be used for good or bad.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about all that misinformation and manipulation.
Right.
Are you saying these nexuses can be used to manipulate people?
Oh, absolutely. History is full of examples of information networks being twisted around for personal gain or even malicious purposes.
The client.
One that Harari talks about is the rise of organized religion.
How does religion fit into this idea of the nexus?
He argues that organized religion, it very cleverly used things like sacred texts and elaborate rituals to create really influential and long-lasting information networks. These religious nexuses often played a key role in building these massive empires and consolidating political power.
So religion provided a unifying ideology,
Mm.
a set of shared beliefs that went beyond geographical and cultural boundaries.
Right. But he also recognizes the darker side of organized religion, like all the intolerance, persecution, and violence throughout history.
Yeah, of course.
It highlights how, even though these information networks can bring people together, they can also be used to divide and control them, leading to things like fanaticism and oppression and conflict.
I see. So it's not just about the information itself, it's also about how it's presented, who controls it, and how it's used to influence people's beliefs and actions.
You got it. And that's why being able to think critically is so important. We need to be aware of the power of these nexuses and know when they're being used to manipulate us. We need to develop those skills to evaluate information and make our own decisions. It's all about cultivating a kind of information literacy, a set of skills that helps us navigate this really complex and constantly changing world of information networks.
Especially now when we're just bombarded with information all the time.
Right.
We talked earlier about how AI could make all these challenges even worse.
Right.
How does Harari see all this information overload playing out in this age of AI?
He's worried that this constant flood of information is going to paralyze us.
What do you mean?
Or we're so overwhelmed that we can't process it effectively anymore.
Right.
And this makes us more vulnerable to manipulation because we just don't have the energy to be as discerning about what we believe.
That makes sense. But if we're practically drowning in information, how do we get out of this? What solutions does Harari offer?
He doesn't give any easy answers, but he emphasizes how important it is to build our critical thinking skills, to be aware of our own biases, and to look for different points of view.
Okay.
He also thinks we need to find ways to create information networks that are more resilient to manipulation and that promote open dialogue and critical thinking.
So what would these more resilient networks actually look like?
He imagines these information ecosystems that are much more transparent and accountable and democratic, where power is more evenly distributed and it's harder to manipulate people.
That's interesting.
It's a big goal, but it's worth working towards, considering how much these networks impact our societies.
So it sounds like the way we manage and navigate these information networks
Yeah,
will have a lasting impact for generations to come.
absolutely. Harari's work reminds us of both the dangers and the possibilities of information networks. It's a cautionary tale, but it also gives us hope that we can learn from the past and create a future that's more informed and equitable.
So taking a step back from the societal level, how do these individual nexuses, like our personal beliefs and narratives, shape our own lives?
Well, think about the stories we tell ourselves, the things we believe in, the values that guide our decisions. These all contribute to our own personal nexus.
Okay.
They shape how we see the world and our place in it.
Right.
And this personal nexus is always interacting with these larger information networks all around us. We're influenced by the news we read, the stuff we see on social media, and the conversations we have with family and friends.
That makes sense. It's like we're each at the center of our own little information web, constantly weaving and being woven into these larger narratives. And you mentioned earlier that Harari sees AI potentially becoming this dominant force in the information world.
Yeah, this is where his analysis gets really fascinating and maybe even a little unsettling. He suggests that AI, with its ability to process huge amounts of data and learn so quickly, could eventually become smarter than humans in almost every way.
We hear a lot about AI's impact on jobs and the economy, but this idea of AI shaping our very perceptions of reality is something else.
Harari paints a picture of a future where algorithms don't just control the information we see, but they actually shape our beliefs and even our emotions.
Okay.
Imagine a world where AI customizes information to our individual preferences so well that we end up isolated in these echo chambers, unable to tell the difference between reality and these perfectly crafted narratives.
It sounds like a dystopian sci-fi novel.
Yeah, there are definitely parallels to those classic sci-fi tropes of machines taking over, but here it's not through force. It's through this subtle manipulation of information. Harari thinks that AI could become incredibly good at exploiting our cognitive biases, feeding us information that just confirms what we already believe and keeps us away from different perspectives.
That's scary, especially considering how much we already rely on algorithms for things like news and social media. Is there any way to prevent this kind of AI manipulation?
Well, Harari doesn't think this future is unavoidable, but he says we need to be aware of the potential dangers of letting AI develop without any controls. He stresses the importance of things like ethical guidelines and regulations to make sure that AI is used to help humanity, not to control or manipulate us.
So what can we do as individuals to navigate this world where information is so complex, especially with the rise of AI?
Harari emphasizes education and critical thinking. He thinks those are our strongest defenses against misinformation and manipulation, whether it comes from AI or anywhere else.
That brings us back to the idea of information literacy. We need to be able to evaluate sources, question what we see and hear, and think for ourselves, especially as the lines between reality and AI-generated content become more and more blurred.
Exactly. In the age of AI, those critical thinking skills will be more important than ever. They're key to navigating this complex and potentially deceptive information landscape and for maintaining our own autonomy and ability to make decisions for ourselves. It's a call to action for all of us to be more engaged, more informed, and more discerning about the information we consume.
It's like a reminder that the future of information and the future of humanity are really closely connected. The choices we make today about how we develop and use AI will have huge consequences down the line. So, for our listeners, what's the key takeaway from this deep dive into Nexus?
I hope it encourages you to keep exploring these ideas, to question your assumptions, to be wary of easy answers, and to have thoughtful conversations about what the future of information will look like in our society.
If you're interested in learning more about Harari's analysis, definitely check out Nexus. You can find a link to the audiobook version down in the comments. Audiobooks are great for learning on the go while you're commuting, working out, or doing chores. Plus, they make great gifts.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please consider supporting our channel. It helps us reach a wider audience and keep exploring these important topics.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and until next time, keep diving deep.